Okay, welcome to Headway Plus Upper Intermediate English Students Book. And we're going to be looking at page 6. Page 6 tells you, gives us an introduction to Unit 1, which is entitled No Place Like Home. At the top, near the top of the page, you see Test Your Grammar. So we're looking at Test Your Grammar on page 6. Part 1 says, which time expressions from the box can be used with the sentences below? So we see 10 sentences, and then on the right you see a box, a rectangle, with lots of different time expressions. Notice, by the way, some of the time expressions are just a single word, like like sometimes, or later, or never. Some of them are a phrase, like ages ago, or in the 1970s. A couple of them are actually clauses, like when I was born, or since I was a child. Notice the phrase in a fortnight's time. A fortnight means 2 weeks. So, in a fortnight's time means 2 weeks from now. Okay, I would recommend that you study these phrases and the sentences for a few minutes and try to see where they go. Maybe you should write a few, or you might want to look at 1 or 2 examples from this video first, then pause the video and write some sentences, and try to write some correct sentences for where these need to go. You don't need to do all of them, but it's a good idea to write at least a few of them and just work with it, study it for a few minutes. We go on to number 1. We have the sentence, my parents met in Paris. Which phrases can go with this sentence? Well, we can say my parents met in Paris in the 1970s. My parents met in Paris ages ago. Or my parents met in Paris during a snowstorm. So those are some interesting options. Notice if we start with this phrase ages ago, we could actually say all 3 of these in one long sentence. My parents met in Paris ages ago in the 1970s during a snowstorm. Now, number 2, we have 3 adverbs of frequency. So we could say they never travel abroad, they frequently travel abroad, or they sometimes travel abroad. Number 3, they were working in Canada when I was born, or in the 1970s, for ages, recently, for a year. Notice, of course, these have very different meanings. We could combine the first 2 and say, they were working in Canada when I was born, or they were working in Canada when I was born in the 1970s. In the 1970s when I was born. Just some examples. Number 4, I was born in Montreal in the 1970s, ages ago, during a snowstorm. Same 3 options as in number 1, by the way. Number 5, we could say my grandparents never lived in Ireland. My grandparents have never lived in Ireland. My grandparents have recently lived in Ireland. We could also take the phrase, my grandparents have lived in Ireland, and add some expressions to the end. For ages, recently, for a year, since I was a child. Now, number 6, we have the phrase, I wrote to my grandmother. We could say, I never, frequently, recently, later, or sometimes wrote to my grandmother. Or we could say, I wrote to my grandmother frequently, ages ago, the other day, recently, during a snowstorm. Of course, there are many possibilities with these words. Number 7, I'm going to work in the U.S. in a fortnight's time. I'm going to work in the U.S. for a year. I'm going to work in the U.S. never, possibly, you could say. I'm going to work in the U.S. later. My brother's frequently flying to Argentina on business. Or we could say, my brother's flying to Argentina on business tonight. Or in a fortnight's time. Or later. Number 9. I'm looking at a book that mentions Spanish. Some of you, depending on the edition, may have one that mentioned Abu Dhabi instead of Argentina. same rules apply. In this version I've got, he's recently been learning Spanish. He's been learning Spanish for ages. He's been learning Spanish recently for a year, or since I was a child. So we went through that pretty quickly, and these are just examples, okay? So you don't have to do them all, and there might be other sentences you could write. The teacher's edition mentions a few others that are unlikely but still possible. You could probably make another sentence with one of these time expressions that was not shown here in this PowerPoint. The point here is to give us some practice to see how they work, right? So part 2 says talk with a partner about yourself and your family using some of the time expressions. Well, unfortunately, because of the coronavirus, it's not easy for you to get together with a partner, but you could talk over the phone, could meet up on the internet, or you could do that as a writing activity and just try to write out some information about yourself using these time expressions or maybe other time expressions that you know. So I hope that's helpful to you. Again, this is just practice and review.